My name is Adam. That wasn't always my name, and if I'm being honest, I can't be certain it always will be. Because for so long, I thought something as simple as my name would never change. I had such a clear idea of myself. Quiet, passive, female. And yet over time, every single one of those things has proven to be false. So that begs the question, who am I? If none of those things were true, even though they felt so central to who I was, then how can I be certain anything I currently believe about myself is true? It wasn't until I started questioning my gender that I realized who you are isn't just how you identify at any point in time. It's what leads you there. The first time I realized I might not be what I had identified as for the first 15 years of my life, I was a little more than frightened. You see, I was a feminine kid. The clothes I wore, the toys I played with, all of it was exactly what you would expect of a stereotypical little girl. It wasn't until a little over a year ago that I started to question whether or not these things actually represented who I was. It was like there had always been this question, unanswered in the back of my mind. Or perhaps it had always been answered for me, so I had never thought to consider it. Either way, as soon as I stumbled into this question, I couldn't get it out of my head. I remember sitting at my desk in my room, staring at a pair of scissors, and thinking about how easily I could just cut my hair. What a relief that would be. But why would I want to do that if I had never wanted short hair before? I just desperately wanted to reconcile how I expressed myself outwardly with how I felt inside. But when I did start to change my appearance, I still felt deeply conflicted. Inevitably, I turned to the internet for answers. But every transgender person I could find online seemed to have always known their identity in some capacity. This led me to believe that I couldn't be trans if I used to insist on wearing dresses and having long hair. I couldn't be trans if I was okay with my old name, or there was a time when I didn't mind being called she. I thought I couldn't be trans if I hadn't always been. For a while, this held me back. I wasn't willing to just disregard that part of my life, but that's what I thought it meant to be trans. However, a lot of grappling and some surprisingly relevant Greek philosophy have led me to believe it's a little more complex than that. I like to look at the Theseus paradox. The Theseus paradox is a thought experiment that asks, if a ship has its parts replaced one by one over time until none of the original parts remain, is it still the same ship? Now, there is no simple answer to this question, but people tend to interpret it a certain way. They see it as the new part annulling the old and therefore changing the identity of the ship. But the way I see it, those parts don't just stop existing once they're removed. They continue to exist as things that once made up the ship, while the new parts simply add to its identity. In other words, I feel like no part of me is ever really replaced. Rather, I feel like my identity is constantly expanding. So when I realized I identified as male, it didn't wholly erase the part of me that once identified as female, because that was part of my journey to get to where I am now. And while I'm still trans, I'm a trans person who realized my identity at age 16 rather than age 6. This discovery about my gender has evolved my identity rather than rewriting it. Reaching this realization has helped me come to terms with this change, and I hope it will help those in my life who are struggling with it as well. That person you knew me as isn't dead. In fact, I wouldn't be who I am now, where I am now, if I hadn't been that person first. So I don't want anyone to mourn who I once was. That part of my life is over, but that doesn't mean it's irrelevant. It's still very much a piece of who I am. And I think if everybody thought of identity this way, as a constant evolution over time, rather than as one specific set of traits, these kinds of shifts in identity would be easier to cope with. None of us are specifically who we were before, who we are now, or who we will be after. It's the act of transitioning from one thing to another, the process of change that constitutes who we are. Whether you've experienced a change in political belief, a change of faith, or even just a change in hairstyle, none of us are the same as we were 5, 10, or 15 years ago. And I doubt we'll be the same 15 years in the future. So, if I change again, and I likely will, if I decide I like my hair long, or I pick a new name for myself, a part of me will always be quiet, passive, loud, assertive, female, male, me. Thank you.